Welcome to the peaceful space of sleep-friendly science, where the universe whispers its secrets not to startle, but to soothe. Tonight we journey into the deepest parts of ourselves, not just our minds, but our very genetic code. Imagine your DNA not as a book, but as an ancient, layered manuscript, where ghostly traces of forgotten ancestors can still be found. We are going to gently turn these pages together, seeking a phantom lineage, a whisper of a lost world that lives on within you. So let your curiosity be a soft, guiding light, and your breath the quiet rhythm of our exploration. Now settle in, take a deep breath, and let the soft sounds guide you as we begin tonight's journey into the unknown. Section 1: The Cave of Whispers. Our journey does not begin with a sudden flash of insight or a loud pronouncement. It begins with a slow, winding exhale of time, in a place where the world itself seems to breathe more deeply. Picture yourself, if you will, standing in the heart of Siberia. Not the stark, endless white you might imagine, but a landscape of rolling hills and gentle mountains, painted in the soft, ancient greens and golds of the Altai Range. The air here is thin and clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a fragrance that feels older than memory. The wind moves through the birch trees not with a roar, but with the hushed, sibilant whisper, as if it is sharing secrets with the stones. This is a land that holds its breath, a place where the silence is not empty, but full of stories waiting to be heard. You are drawn towards a particular formation of rock, a gentle limestone cliff face that has watched the sun rise and set for hundreds of thousands of years. Nestled into its base is a dark opening, an entrance that seems less like a geological feature and more like a mouth about to speak. This is the Denisova cave. It is not a grand or imposing cavern. It has no towering stalactites or dramatic chasms. Its magic is quieter, more subtle. It is a sanctuary, a shelter that has been a home, a workshop, and a resting place for countless generations, not all of them like you. As you step across the threshold, you feel the world shift. The air instantly cools and the sounds of the outside world, the wind, the distant cry of a bird fall away, replaced by a profound and resonant stillness. The light changes from the wide, open sky to a soft, gray luminescence that filters in from the entrance, losing its strength as it spills across the dusty floor. You are now inside a library, but the books are not made of paper and ink. They are written in layers of sediment, in flecks of charcoal from ancient fires, and in the scattered, forgotten fragments of lives lived long ago. Imagine the floor of this cave not as solid ground, but as a dense, layered manuscript, each layer a page. For decades, archaeologists have been reading this book, turning these pages with the most delicate of touches. With soft brushes and patient hands, they have sifted through the dust of ages, uncovering the history of this quiet place. In the upper layers, they found the tools and traces of modern humans, your direct ancestors from more recent millennia. Deeper still, they found the distinctive, stout bones and robust tools of Neanderthals, our famous cousins who roamed Ice Age Europe and Asia. For a long time, this was the expected story. A place where humans and Neanderthals had, at different times, sought refuge from the Siberian chill. The cave was a known landmark on the map of our past. But this cave held a deeper secret, a chapter written in a language no one yet knew how to read. The story of its greatest revelation begins not with a grand discovery, but with the smallest of things. In 2008, in a layer of earth dated to between 50,000 and 75,000 years ago, a Russian archaeological team was working with their usual methodical care. They were sifting through the earth grain by grain when they found it. It was not a skull. It was not a jawbone or a femur, or anything that would immediately announce its importance. It was a tiny piece of bone smaller than a coin, so small you could easily close your hand around it and forget it was there. It was the very tip of a finger bone. To the naked eye, it was almost nothing. A fragment, a fossilized afterthought. Later analysis would suggest it belonged to a young girl, perhaps no more than 13 years old. a child who lived and played and felt the cold and perhaps sat by a fire right here in this very cave so long ago that the stars in the night sky were in different positions. This tiny bone was labeled Denisova 3. It was found in a layer that also contained Neanderthal remains, so the initial assumption was simple. It must be Neanderthal, or perhaps a very early modern human. It was catalogued, carefully stored, and its story might have ended there, a minor footnote in the larger history of the cave. But this tiny, unassuming fragment held a universe within it. It was not a punctuation mark at the end of a known sentence. It was the first word of a completely new paragraph in the epic of human evolution. Sealed within the mineralized matrix of that bone, protected from the ravages of time, was something that had only recently become possible to retrieve. The ghostly, delicate threads of ancient DNA. This was the secret the cave had been holding. Not a story written in stone, but in the elegant, spiraling code of life itself. The finger bone, this fossilized whisper from a long-vanished child, was sent on a journey, far from the quiet mountains of Altai. It was sent to a laboratory in Leipzig, Germany, to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, a place where scientists had learned to listen to these genetic ghosts. They were about to ask this tiny bone a simple question. Who were you? They believed they already knew the answer. But the bone, and the ghost within it, was about to give an answer that would change our understanding of our own story forever. It was an answer that would ripple out from the lab and back through time, reanimating a lost world and revealing a phantom branch of our own family tree. You can almost feel the shift in the air, a change in the quality of the silence. It is the moment just before a revelation. The cave, having given up its secret, seems to wait. The dust motes dance in the faint light, each one a tiny world, a tiny possibility. The journey of this bone is now your journey. Its story is becoming your story. As we follow this thread of ancient life out of the darkness of the cave, and into the bright, analytical light of a world it could never have imagined. The child it belonged to is gone, a ghost on the wind, but her legacy, her lineage, was just about to be reborn. Section 2. A ghost in the code. And so the journey of that tiny, unassuming bone continues. It travels from the silent, ancient dust of the Siberian cave to a place that is, in every way, its opposite. Leave the earthy dark behind and step into a world of controlled light, sterile air, and the quiet, persistent hum of advanced technology. You are now within the clean rooms of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany. Here, the past is not excavated with brushes and trowels, but with pipettes, sequencing machines, and the immense power of computational analysis. The air itself is filtered, cleaner than the world outside, to prevent the ultimate contamination. The DNA of the living interfering with the whispers of the dead. Imagine the scientists who receive this small fragment. They are a special kind of historian, a unique type of archaeologist. They do not read runes carved in stone. They read the language of life itself, a script written in a four-letter alphabet of adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. Their leader, a man named Svante Pabo, has dedicated his life to this near-impossible task, retrieving coherent genetic stories from the tattered, fragmented pages of deep time. They are, in essence, learning to hear ghosts. The fragment of bone, Denisova 3, is treated with a reverence usually reserved for a priceless gem. The challenge is immense. DNA is a famously fragile molecule. Over tens of thousands of years it breaks down, shatters into tiny, unreadable pieces. It is attacked by microbes, leached by water, and damaged by cosmic rays. Retrieving a full genetic sequence from a 50,000-year-old bone is like trying to reconstruct an entire, epic poem from a handful of letters salvaged from a burnt library. The first step is a delicate and dangerous one. Drilling a tiny amount of bone powder from the precious sample. This is done in a sealed chamber, under conditions of absolute sterility. A single stray skin cell, a cough, a floating speck of dust from one of the researchers could overwhelm the faint, ancient signal with a tidal wave of modern DNA. It is a process of infinite patience. Once the powder is extracted, a complex chemical ballet begins. Potions and enzymes are used to coax the ghostly DNA fragments out of their mineral prison. They are bathing the bone dust in solutions designed to gently wash away the material of the bone itself, while leaving behind the precious, ghostly threads of the genetic code. Think of it as carefully lifting the ink off a page of ancient parchment that has turned to stone, leaving the words floating, free from the medium that held them. Then comes the true magic of this modern age. The salvaged fragments, these broken whispers of a genetic past, are fed into sequencing machines. These machines are the scribes of this new era. Inside their sleek, humming casings, a process of incredible complexity unfolds. They read each tiny fragment, letter by letter, and record the sequence. The output is not a story, but a deluge of data, billions of short, disconnected strings of A's, T's, C's, and G's, stored on massive computer servers. It is a chaotic, fragmented ghost, shattered into a million pieces. The next task falls to the bioinformaticians, the digital archaeologists. Their job is to take this storm of data and piece it back together. They use the known sequence of modern human DNA as a scaffold, a reference map. Imagine having a complete copy of a famous play, and then being given a box full of shredded, scrambled sentences from a lost, unknown work. By finding small overlaps in familiar phrases, you might be able to painstakingly piece the new text together. This is what they do. Computer algorithms work for days, sifting through the billions of fragments, looking for overlaps, aligning them against the human and Neanderthal genomes, stitching them together into a coherent whole. This is the moment of truth. The team in Leipzig had done this before. They were the first to sequence the Neanderthal genome, a monumental achievement. As the Denisovans sequence began to assemble on their computer screens, they expected a familiar pattern to emerge. The data would align cleanly with the Neanderthal reference. Or perhaps it would be a very early version of the modern human genome. That was the logical, expected result. The cave story so far was one of Neanderthals and modern humans. But that is not what happened. As the genetic text became clearer, a profound sense of confusion, followed by an electrifying sense of wonder, filled the lab. The sequence was human-like, certainly. It was a close relative. But it was not Neanderthal. They compared it to the Neanderthal genome they had so painstakingly assembled. The differences were stark, consistent, and undeniable. The number of genetic variations was far too great. This was like reading a familiar dialect and finding it has a different grammar, different vocabulary. It was clearly a distinct lineage. So, they compared it to the modern human genome, to sequences from people all over the world. Again, it was different. It was older, a branch that had split off from our own much, much deeper in time. It was not us. It was not Neanderthal. It was something else. Imagine being an astronomer who has spent your life studying the known planets. You know, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, their orbits, their character. Then one night, you point your telescope at a patch of familiar sky, and a new planet swims into view. A world no one knew existed. The feeling in that lab must have been the same. It was a moment of pure discovery, a jolt that rearranges the very cosmos you thought you knew. On their computer screens, in strings of letters generated from a fleck of bone dust, was a ghost. A ghost in the machine. They had found a new type of human. A phantom lineage whose existence had been completely unknown to science. The child's finger bone was no longer just a fossil. It was an ambassador from a lost world. It was proof that our family tree had a major thriving branch that no one had ever suspected was there. The story of human evolution, a tale we thought we were beginning to understand, had just been turned on its head. The quiet cave in the Altai Mountains had whispered its secret, and the humming machines in Leipzig had learned how to hear it. The ghost was no longer silent. It now had a voice, a script, and the first question it asked was not, "Who was I?" But did you know I was here? The answer from a stunned and amazed scientific community was a resounding no. The phantom had stepped out of the shadows. Section 3. Naming the phantom lineage. A discovery of this magnitude leaves behind a profound silence. In the Leipzig lab, the humming of the machine seems to fade into the background, replaced by the weight of a single echoing question. What do we do now? To find an entirely new branch of the human family is like discovering a new primary color. It changes the palette of everything you thought you knew. The ghost in the code was real. Its sequence spelled out in glowing letters on a screen. But it was also completely anonymous. It was a phantom, a whisper, a string of data without a face or a name. And in science as in life, a name is everything. A name is a vessel. It is a handle that allows you to grasp a concept, to speak of it, to share it, and to begin the long, slow process of understanding it. Before a name could be given, the finding had to be interrogated with an almost ruthless skepticism. Science at its best is a beautifully paranoid process. Could there be a mistake? Could the ancient DNA have been contaminated in some unknown way? Could the analytical models be wrong? The team, led by Svante Pääbo and Johannes Krauss, checked and rechecked their work. They ran the analysis again and again. They used different computational methods. Every test, every cross-examination came back with the same impossible, wondrous answer. The sequence was unique. It was ancient. It was a distinct hominin. The ghost held its ground. Now came the delicate task of classification. What was this being? Was it a new species, like Homo neanderthalensis? Or was it a subspecies? A variation on a known theme? The very concept of species becomes wonderfully fuzzy when you travel this deep into the past. In biology, a species is often defined by the ability to produce fertile offspring. But how can you test that with beings who have been gone for 50,000 years? The lines blur, and the neat boxes we like to create for the world begin to dissolve. The scientists decided to be cautious, to be humble. Instead of declaring a new species based on a genome alone, they chose a different path. They chose to let the ghost remain a little ghostly. For now, it would be referred to simply as a distinct lineage, a population. It needed a name not of rigid classification, but of identity. A name to call it by. The tradition in paleoanthropology is often to name a discovery after the place it was found. Think of Neanderthal man, named for the Neander Valley in Germany where the first recognized specimen was found. Or Homo floresiensis, the Hobbit, named for the island of Flores in Indonesia. The choice was therefore simple, elegant, and deeply appropriate. The cave that had held this secret for so long was called Denisova. The name itself is steeped in a quiet history, believed to be named after a Russian hermit, a man named Denis, who reportedly lived there in the 18th century. So this new ancient human would be named for the hermit, and for the home he chose. They would be called the Denisovans. It is a soft-sounding name. Denisovan. It doesn't have the hard Latin finality of a formal species name. Feels more provisional, more mysterious. It is a name that honors the place of discovery, a tribute to the silent, patient guardian of this incredible secret. In giving it this name, the scientists transformed it. It was no longer Denisova 3, the specimen number of a finger bone. It was now the Denisovans, a people, a population. A lost world began to coalesce around that single word. With a name, they could now formally introduce this phantom to the world. In the spring of 2010, the results were published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. Imagine that paper landing on desks and screens in universities and museums around the globe. It was a quiet thunderclap. A new human. Not found in Africa, the cradle of mankind, or in Europe, the traditional home of the Neanderthals, but in a remote cave in Siberia, and revealed not by a striking skull, but by the ghostly echo of its genes. It was a profound rewriting of the recent human story. The next step was to figure out where this new character fit into the family album. This is where the true poetry of genetics unfolds. Using a concept known as the molecular clock, scientists can estimate how long ago different lineages diverged. The idea is wonderfully simple in its essence. Genetic mutations, the tiny copying errors in DNA, accumulate at a roughly constant rate over the generations. They are like the steady ticking of a clock. By comparing the number of genetic differences between two lineages, you can estimate how long their clocks have been ticking separately. It's like finding two long-lost twins, each with a watch that was synchronized when they were parted. By seeing the difference in time on their watches now, you can calculate how long they've been apart. They compared the Denisovan genome to the Neanderthal genome and to the genomes of modern humans. The clock began to reveal its secrets. The analysis showed that the branch leading to modern humans, our own lineage, had split off from the branch shared by these other humans a very long time ago, perhaps 600,000 to 800,000 years in the past. But the Denisovan and Neanderthal lineages had stayed together for longer. Their shared branch split into two only later, perhaps around 400,000 years ago. This revealed a stunning family relationship. The Denisovans were not our direct cousins. They were more like our cousins' cousins. More accurately, they were a sister group to the Neanderthals. Imagine a great river flowing out of the past. That is our common ancestral line. At one point, our river, the Homo sapiens line, splits off and carves its own path. The main river continues on for a while, and then it too splits into two new mighty streams. One becomes the Neanderthals, the other, the Denisovans. They are more closely related to each other than either is to us. They were siblings in the grand human family, and we were their close cousins. This was a revelation. We had always imagined our past as a more or less linear march, with our Neanderthal cousins as our primary prehistoric companions. Now the stage was suddenly more crowded. There was a third player, a vast and mysterious population living in Asia, whose identity was completely unsuspected. Naming them was the first step. Placing them in the family tree was the second. Now the real work could begin. The work of trying to understand who these people were. The act of naming them was an act of creation. It took an abstract string of data, a ghost in the machine, and gave it a place to live in our imagination. The Denisovans were born, paradoxically, millions of years after they had lived, in the sterile quiet of a German laboratory, from the dust of a child's finger. The phantom now had a name and a history, but it still had no face. Section 4. A world of many humans. With a name, the Denisovans ceased to be just a sequence of data and become a presence. But to truly understand that presence, you must now lift your gaze from the micro-universe of the genome and look out upon the world they inhabited. It is a world you must imagine into being, for it is both deeply familiar and profoundly alien. You must erase the maps, the ones with sharp colored borders separating nations. You must quiet the hum of the modern world and listen for older rhythms, the slow, deep pulse of a planet breathing through its ice ages. This was the late Pleistocene, a time not of static, perpetual ice but of epic cyclical change. Imagine the Earth as a restless sleeper, tossing and turning under a blanket of stars. For thousands of years the world would cool. Glaciers, those rivers of ice, would awaken in the north, and with a slow, unstoppable breath, they would advance, grinding continents under their weight. The oceans would recede as vast amounts of water were locked up in these continent-sized sheets of ice, exposing new coastlines and creating land bridges where today there is only open sea. And then, just as slowly, the cycle would turn. The planet would warm, the great ice sheets would sigh, weep, and retreat, and the seas would rise again. This was the metronome that governed all life, a rhythm of cold and warmth, of scarcity and abundance, that shaped every living thing. It was a wilder world. Herds of woolly mammoths, their great curved tusks sweeping through the snow, moved like walking hills across the vast treeless steppes of Eurasia. Woolly rhinoceroses, heavy and implacable, grazed on the tough grasses. In the shadows of the forests and caves prowled predators of an epic scale, Cave lions larger than any lion you know today, and short-faced bears of tremendous size. This was the world that humanity had to navigate, not as its master, but as one of its many clever, struggling children. First, there were your own direct ancestors, Homo sapiens. They were the newcomers. Having emerged from their African homeland, they were pushing tentatively into the Middle East and beyond, following the coasts, moving up the rivers. They were adaptable, innovative, perhaps gifted with the new fluency of symbolic thought and complex language. They carried with them a different kind of toolkit, both physically and mentally. They were the explorers, stepping into a world that had been inhabited by others for hundreds of thousands of years. Second, there were the Neanderthals. They were the established rulers of the West. From the shores of the Atlantic across the frozen plains of Ice Age Europe, and deep into the Levant and Western Asia, this was their heartland. They were not the grunting, brutish caricatures of old cartoons. They were a profoundly successful and intelligent form of human. They were powerfully built, adapted to the cold. They were skilled hunters, masters of their domain. They cared for their sick and elderly. They buried their dead. And they survived in the harshest of climates for over 300,000 years. When your ancestors arrived in Europe, they were not stepping into an empty land. They were entering the Neanderthals' world. And now, with the ghost from the cave given a name, we know there was a third great actor on this stage, the Denisovans. If the Neanderthals were the masters of the West, the Denisovans were the mysterious phantoms of the East. Their known world so far was centered around that cave in the Altai Mountains, a crossroads of potential empires. But as you will see, their shadow was cast much, much wider. While we had skeletons and tools to sketch a picture of the Neanderthals, the Denisovans were, for the moment, almost entirely ethereal, known only from their genetic script. They were a vast, unknown population whose realm stretched across the immense continent of Asia. You must try to picture this world, not as a map of three separate, color-coded empires, but as a living landscape of overlapping territories. Imagine three different species of wolf, perhaps. Their ranges might overlap at the edges. They might hunt the same prey. They might drink from the same rivers. Their encounters would be rare, dictated by the vastness of the land and the smallness of their family groups. For long stretches of time, they would have been entirely unaware of each other, living out their lives in parallel universes on the same planet. But sometimes those universes would have touched. In a mountain pass, by a river crossing, in a sheltered valley during a brutal winter, they would have met. A band of modern humans, lean and dark from their journey out of the south, coming face to face with a group of powerfully built Neanderthals. Or perhaps one of them, wandering east, encountering the utterly unknown face of a Denisovan. What would those moments have been like? A flicker of fear? Of curiosity? Of recognition? Did they see each other as monster or as rival, or as something strangely, distantly familiar, another kind of person in the world? We can never know the feelings of those encounters, but the discovery in the cave proves one irrefutable thing. They did not always result in conflict. This is the world that was revealed by that tiny piece of bone. A world not of a single human story, but a world of many human stories, all unfolding at once. It was a human tapestry woven from different threads. And as these different peoples moved across the changing landscapes of the Pleistocene, their paths sometimes crossed. Their stories, which had run in parallel for so long, occasionally intersected. The discovery of the Denisovans proved that our history was not a monologue. It was a conversation. And the most startling revelation was yet to come. The proof that these conversations, these ancient encounters, had left a permanent echo. An echo that was not lost to the winds of time, but was still present, still audible within you. Section 5. The Echo Inside You. Now our journey takes a sudden, profound turn. It pivots from the vast, external landscapes of the Ice Age world and moves inward, into a landscape that is simultaneously more intimate and, in its own way, just as vast and mysterious, the landscape of your own body. We have followed the ghost from a cave in Siberia to a lab in Germany. We have given it a name and placed it on our complex family tree. We have imagined the world it shared with our ancestors. But all of this remains a story about the past, a tale of them. The next chapter of this discovery is what makes it so breathtakingly personal. It is where the story ceases to be about them and becomes, astonishingly, a story about you. Back in the Leipzig lab, the Denisovan genome was now assembled, a book written in an ancient but readable dialect of the human language. The scientists had it. They also had the Neanderthal genome. And, of course, they had access to the genomes of thousands of modern humans from all around the world. The next logical step was a grand comparison. A search for echoes. The question they asked was simple, but its implications were enormous. Did any of these ancient conversations, these crossroads encounters in the Pleistocene world, leave a mark? When a group of your ancestors met a group of Denisovans, what happened next? The hypothesis for decades had been one of replacement. Your ancestors, the story went, with their superior minds and tools, swept out of Africa and simply replaced the archaic humans they met, driving them to extinction through competition or conflict. It was a neat, clean story. But the new ability to read the book of the genome allowed for a more subtle possibility to be tested. The possibility of interbreeding, of admixture, of love or at least of union across these ancient human lines. The team, led by Pablo and a brilliant population geneticist named David Reich, began to scan. They developed sophisticated statistical tools designed to hunt for the faintest of genetic footprints. Imagine sifting through a library of 1 million books, all written in modern English, looking for a handful of sentences, or even just a few distinctive words, written in a lost archaic dialect. That is what they were doing. They were looking for telltale stretches of Denisovan DNA hiding in plain sight within the genomes of modern humans. They began by looking at the genomes of people from Europe and Asia. As expected from their previous work, they found the echo of Neanderthals. About 1 to 2% of the DNA of all non-African people today is a direct inheritance from their Neanderthal ancestors. This was already a revolutionary idea that these ancient encounters had been intimate ones. But now they were looking for a different ghost. When they scanned the genomes of people from mainland Eurasia, from China, from Europe, they found nothing. No Denisovan echo. It seemed for a moment that the story ended there. The Denisovans were a ghost population that had vanished without a trace, a sister to the Neanderthals who had perhaps lived and died in isolation in their Siberian corner of the world. But then they widened their search. They looked at the genomes of people from further afield. And that is when the ghost reappeared. In the DNA of a person from Papua New Guinea, an island north of Australia, the signal suddenly blazed into view. It was not a faint whisper. It was a clear, undeniable shout. Long, distinct characteristic blocks of the Denisovan genome were sitting right there, woven seamlessly into the modern human DNA. It was not a trivial amount. It was between 4 and 6%. A stunningly high number. The discovery was so unexpected, so geographically strange, that it had to be a mistake. Papua New Guinea is thousands of miles from the Denisova cave in Siberia. How could the genetic legacy of a Siberian ghost be strongest in a modern islander from the tropical Pacific? It made no sense. They checked again. They analyzed the DNA of other indigenous populations from the region, from Australian Aboriginals, from the Mamanwa people in the Philippines. And there it was again. The same strong, clear signal. The echo of the Denisovans was not in Siberia. It was here, in the islands of Southeast Asia and Oceania. Let the geography of that sink in. A human group, whose only physical remains ever found were a finger bone and a few teeth in a single cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, had left their most powerful genetic legacy in people living on the other side of Asia, in a completely different climate, thousands upon thousands of miles away. This was a discovery of staggering implications. It meant the Denisovans were not some small, isolated band of Siberian hermits. They must have been a vast and incredibly widespread people. Their range must have stretched from the cold, subarctic forests of Russia all the way down to the tropical rainforests of Southeast Asia. They were not a footnote in the human story. They were a major, continent-spanning population. And it meant that your ancestors, as they moved out of Africa and spread across the world, had not just met Neanderthals in the West. As they pushed into Asia, they met these other people, the Denisovans, and they did not just fight them or outcompete them. They saw them as human. They had children with them. Those children, born of two different worlds, carried the DNA of both, and their descendants carried that mixed legacy on generation after generation, as they continued their incredible journey of exploration, eventually reaching the islands of the Pacific. This is why you today might carry a trace of this lost world within you. If your ancestry traces back to Europe or mainland Asia, you are likely carrying a small piece of the Neanderthal story. But if your family tree has roots in Melanesia, in Papua New Guinea, in Australia, in the Philippines, or even in Tibet, as we would later learn, you are also carrying something more. You are a living library. You hold within your cells the genetic memory of these encounters. The child from the Denisova cave is your ancestor. Not a direct-line grandmother perhaps, but a distant great-aunt. A member of a sister family whose legacy has been woven, through an ancient act of love or union, directly into the tapestry of your own being. The phantom lineage was not a phantom at all. It was a real, widespread, and resilient population that has, in a very real sense, achieved a kind of immortality. They have survived their own extinction by becoming a part of us. The echo is not in the cave anymore. It's not just in the data on a computer screen. It's inside the cells of living people. The ghost story has become a story of family reunion. Section 6. Gifts from a Lost World. The discovery that the Denisovan echo lives on within us is on its own a profound revelation. It rewrites our sense of self, transforming our DNA from a simple blueprint into a rich historical tapestry. But the story does not end with the simple fact of this inheritance. The journey inward continues to a deeper and even more astonishing question. What did this inherited DNA do? Was it just junk, functionless baggage carried over from a forgotten evolutionary past? Or did these ghostly genes, these gifts from a lost world, actively shape the biology of the modern humans who carry them? Think of it this way: your ancestors, Homo sapiens, were a tropical people. They evolved for hundreds of thousands of years under the African sun. As they began to expand into the rest of the world, they were stepping into environments for which they were not prepared. The climates were different. The altitudes were different. The foods were different. And, crucially, the local diseases, the bacteria and viruses, were completely new and alien. They were pioneers entering a new world, and they were immunologically naive. The Denisovans and Neanderthals, by contrast, were the old-timers. They had been living in these Eurasian landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years. Over immense stretches of time, their bodies and their genomes had been shaped by these local pressures. They were adapted, through the slow, patient work of natural selection, to the specific challenges of these places. Their immune systems had a deep, ancestral memory of the local pathogens. Their bodies knew how to handle the cold, or the thin air of high mountains. Now imagine that ancient encounter again. A group of modern humans meets a group of Denisovans. They have children. Those children inherit a shuffled deck of genes from both parents. They get the innovative, adaptable mind of Homo sapiens, but they might also get a suite of Denisovan genes that are already perfectly tuned to the local environment. This is not just interbreeding. It is a biological masterstroke. It's like a new company. Instead of spending years on research and development, acquiring a competitor that has already perfected the local technology. It was a genetic shortcut, a way for modern humans to rapidly adapt to a new world by borrowing the hard-won wisdom of its longtime inhabitants. Scientists, armed with the Denisovan genome map, began to hunt through the DNA of modern Melanesians and Tibetans, looking not just for the Denisovan segments, but for signs that these segments had been actively useful. They were looking for the telltale signature of positive selection evidence that a particular gene was so beneficial that it spread rapidly through the population. And they found them. The gifts were real. One of the most powerful and clearest examples lies in our immune system. Your immune system is a vast and complex library of defensive tools. A large part of it is controlled by a set of genes called the HLA system. These genes are the eagle-eyed watchmen of your body, responsible for recognizing foreign invaders like viruses and bacteria, and marking them for destruction. The more diverse this set of genes, the more pathogens you can recognize and fight off. When scientists looked at the HLA genes of people from Papua New Guinea, they found variant-specific versions of these genes that were a direct match for the ones found in the Denisovan genome from that Siberian cave. These were not human variants. They were Denisovan heirlooms. A modern islander in the tropical Pacific is fighting off local diseases today using a genetic tool bequeathed to their ancestors by a Denisovan in subarctic Asia 50,000 years ago. It is a gift of survival passed across millennia. But perhaps the most stunning and beautifully clear-cut example of a Denisovan gift comes not from the islands of the Pacific, but from the roof of the world. For centuries, it has been a source of wonder how Tibetan people thrive in the thin, oxygen-poor air of the high-altitude Tibetan plateau. At altitudes above 4,000 meters, most people suffer from altitude sickness. The lack of oxygen puts a tremendous strain on the body, leading to an overproduction of red blood cells, which thickens the blood and can cause heart attacks and strokes. But Tibetans are different. Their bodies have a unique adaptation, a different way of managing oxygen that avoids these dangers. For a long time, the origin of this remarkable ability was a mystery. The answer was found written in their genes. Scientists discovered that Tibetans carry a special version of a gene called AS1. This gene is like a master switch for the body's response to low oxygen. The Tibetan version is exquisitely tuned, allowing them to cruise through the thin air with remarkable efficiency. When the scientists decided to check where this miraculous gene variant came from, they ran its sequence against the ancient genome database. It was not a modern human mutation. It wasn't from Neanderthals. It was a near-perfect match for the EPAS1 gene found in the Denisovan genome. The story this tells is breathtaking. As your ancestors tried to move up into the high plateau of Tibet, they struggled. The air was poisonously thin. But they met and interbred with a population of local Denisovans who had been living in the mountains of Asia for eons, and had already perfected the genetic trick for high-altitude survival. The children who inherited this Denisovan gene variant thrived. Those who didn't perished or moved to lower ground. Over generations, this precious Denisovan gift spread until it became nearly universal among Tibetans. They owe their ability to live on the roof of the world to a phantom lineage we never knew existed. The ghost from a Siberian cave gave them the key to unlock one of the harshest environments on Earth. There are other, more subtle gifts being discovered. Variants related to fat metabolism to skin and hair traits to responses to cold. The Denisovans, it turns out, were not just a phantom lineage we absorbed. They were a vital source of genetic raw material that helped us, their successors, finish the conquest of the planet. They gave us the tools to survive in the very lands they once called home. The echo inside you, if you carry it, is not a silent one. It is an active, living part of you. It is a biological whisper from a lost world, still teaching your body how to navigate this one. Section 7. A crossroads of ancient peoples. Just when the story seems to have found a stable shape, it dissolves and recrystallizes into something even more complex, even more beautiful. We have journeyed inward, finding the Denisovan echo within ourselves, a gift from a lost world. We have come to see our own DNA as a living museum of these ancient encounters. But the story, you see, has another layer, another secret chamber. We have asked what happened when our ancestors met the Denisovans. But we have not yet asked a much deeper question. Who did the Denisovans meet? They too were explorers. They too lived in a world of many humans. Their own story, their own lineage was not a simple straight line. Let us return to that digital book, the Denisovan Genome, meticulously assembled in the quiet humming labs of Leipzig. It is the only true testament we have of this entire people. A history written in a language of 4 letters. The scientists, in their meticulous reading of this book, began to notice something strange. They had learned to recognize the characteristic dialect of the Denisovans. But as they scanned through the chapters of the genome, there were passages, entire paragraphs, that seemed to be written in an even older, more foreign dialect. There were stretches of DNA that did not look Denisovan. They did not look Neanderthal. And they certainly didn't look like early Homo sapiens. They looked other, more ancient, more different than anything they had expected to find. It was a ghost within a ghost, an echo inside an echo. To understand what they were seeing, you must imagine the genome as an archaeological dig. As you dig down, you expect to find the remains of the city you are excavating, the Denisovan layer. But imagine, as you are clearing the floor of a Denisovan house, you find a piece of pottery that is of a completely different, much older style. It doesn't belong. It must have come from an even older buried city and been brought to the surface somehow. This is what the geneticists found. Embedded within the Denisovan DNA were fragments from a completely separate and much more ancient human lineage. This meant that the Denisovans themselves had interbred with another, even more mysterious group of archaic humans. The molecular clock, that marvelous tool for telling time deep in the past, was put to work once more. The scientists compared these strange, super-archaic fragments to the Denisovan genome, the Neanderthal genome, and the modern human genome. When they did, the clock gave them a number that was almost dizzying. The lineage that these ghostly fragments belonged to had split off from our own branch of the family tree, more than 1 million years ago. Let that timeline settle. Your ancestors, the Homo sapiens line, diverged from the Neanderthal/Denisovan line about 600,000 to 800,000 years ago. This new ghost, this phantom that left its mark inside the Denisovans, had branched off from our shared ancestry long before that. This was a being that belonged to a much older chapter of the human story. A name for this ghost began to be whispered in the halls of science, a name you might have heard before: Homo erectus, the upright man. Homo erectus was one of the great success stories of human evolution. They were perhaps the first of our ancestors to truly walk the earth, spreading out of Africa almost 2 million years ago. They were pioneers, toolmakers, the first masters of fire. For more than 1.5 million years, they populated the continent of Asia. They were the original inhabitants, the truly ancient ones. For a long time we believed they had simply vanished from the scene long before we, or the Neanderthals or the Denisovans arrived. But this discovery suggested something else. It suggested that maybe they didn't just vanish. Perhaps some late surviving pockets of these ancient people, these Homo erectus or a similar super-archaic group, were still living in the far corners of Asia when the Denisovans spread into their territory. And just as our ancestors would later meet and mingle with the Denisovans themselves had met and mingled with these even more ancient, venerable people. Now, picture the Denisova cave again. Its importance, its magic deepens immeasurably. It ceases to be just a home for Neanderthals and Denisovans. It becomes a true crossroads of humanity, a genetic melting pot of incredible diversity. The very ground beneath your feet in that cave is now layered with an almost unimaginable history. Deep in the sediment, perhaps, are the traces of these super-archaic humans. Then comes the long tendency of the Denisovans, who carry the legacy of those older people within their very genes. Then the Neanderthals arrive, leaving their tools and their DNA, and as later evidence would show, even having a child with a Denisovan woman in this very cave. And finally, much later, your own ancestors, Homo sapiens, arrive, adding their layer to the story. This one quiet cave in the Altai Mountains becomes a nexus point, a meeting place for at least 4 distinct kinds of humans over the vast expanse of the Pleistocene. The human family tree, which we once imagined as a neat trunk with a few simple branches, is revealed to be something far more wild and beautiful. It is not a tree at all. It is a tangled bank, a braided river where streams diverge, flow in parallel for millennia, and then miraculously flow back into one another, exchanging waters before parting again. The Denisovans are no longer just a sister to the Neanderthals. They are a bridge. They are a connection to a past so deep it was thought to be lost forever. They carry within them the genetic echo of a world a million years old, and they passed a faint trace of that echo through their own DNA, perhaps even into the modern humans who carry their legacy today. The story of our origins has become richer, more complex, and more interwoven than we ever dared to imagine. The ghost from the cave was not alone. It was haunted itself by an even older spirit. Section 8. Sketching a face from DNA. For this entire journey, we have been chasing a ghost. A whisper in a cave, a sequence on a screen, an echo in the cells of the living. The Denisovans have been a profound, but ultimately formless, presence. We know their name, we know some of their story, we even carry parts of their legacy. But we have been unable to answer the most fundamental, most human of questions. What did they look like? To know someone truly, we feel a deep need to picture their face, to look into their eyes. Without a face, a ghost remains a mystery. With a face, it begins to feel like an ancestor. The physical evidence was and remains incredibly scarce. A tiny phalanx bone from a child's pinky finger. 3 enormous molars, so large that at first they were mistaken for the teeth of a cave bear. And later, a powerful jawbone found on the Tibetan plateau, which we will return to. From these fragments you can infer certain things. They were robust, large-toothed people. But you cannot reconstruct a face from a finger bone. You cannot sketch a portrait from a tooth. The traditional methods of paleoanthropology, which rely on the careful measurement of a skull, were impossible. The Denisovan ghosts seemed destined to remain faceless forever. But here our story turns to a new kind of magic, a science so subtle and ingenious it feels like divination. It is a journey into the world of epigenetics. If DNA is the book of life, epigenetics is the collection of notes scribbled in the margins. It is the layer of information on top of the genes that tells them what to do. Imagine your DNA as a vast piano keyboard. Every gene is a key capable of playing a certain note, creating a certain protein. The Denisovan keyboard was very similar to the Neanderthal keyboard, and very similar to your own. But what matters is not just the keys themselves, but which keys are being played, how loudly, and which are being silenced. Epigenetics is the pianist. One of the main ways the pianist controls the music is through a process called DNA methylation. Think of it as a tiny chemical off switch, or perhaps more accurately, a dimmer switch that can be attached to a gene. If a gene is heavily methylated, its dimmer switch is turned way down. The gene is silenced or expressed very weakly. If it has no methylation, the switch is on full, and the gene plays its note loudly. This is the key. The pattern of these dimmer switches, this methylation map, helps to define the unique characteristics of a creature. It's what makes a skin cell different from a brain cell, even though both contain the exact same DNA keyboard. And crucially, these methylation patterns are involved in how an animal's body develops, especially its skeleton. An audacious idea began to form in the minds of scientists, particularly a team led by Liran Carmel and David Gochman at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. They knew that as ancient DNA breaks down over thousands of years, something peculiar happens to these methylation switches. The chemical tags fall off, but they leave behind a specific type of damage, a scar. They realized they could read these ancient scars. They could reconstruct the methylation map. The pianist song off the Denisovan girl. They could see which of her genes had been turned down and which had been turned up. The next step was an act of brilliant comparison. They created a list of all the places where the Denisovan methylation map was different from that of modern humans and from Neanderthals. Where were their dimmer switches set to different levels? They found hundreds of genes where the Denisovan pattern was unique. And many of these genes they discovered were linked to the growth and development of the face and the skeleton. Now the final breathtaking leap. By looking at what is known about these genes in modern humans, what happens when they are turned up or down, they could start to build a picture. It was like finding the pianist's sheet music and using it to predict the shape of the piano itself. For example, they found that in Denisovans, genes that control the growth of the facial plates were more active. The dimmer switch was turned up. This would lead to a face that was noticeably wider than that of modern humans or Neanderthals. Genes related to the growth of the dental arch were also highly active, which aligns perfectly with those enormous teeth found in the cave. One by one, they assembled the features, sketching the ghost from its own genetic instructions. The portrait that emerged was that of a person who was recognizably human, but distinct. They predicted the Denisovans had a very low forehead and a long face, similar to Neanderthals. But unlike Neanderthals, who had a prominent, forward-projecting face, the Denisovan face was likely flatter but much, much wider. They had a wide, robust jaw, no chin, and a very broad pelvis and chest. They were powerfully built people, not just in their limbs, but in the very architecture of their skulls. This was not a photograph. It was not an artist's wild guess. It was a data-driven reconstruction, a police sketch drawn from the testimony of the genome itself. It was the first time anyone had produced a plausible picture of an extinct human group without first having a complete skull. It was a ghost story told by science. Hold this image in your mind. A person with a broad, calm face wider than any you know. A powerful build, adapted to a life of physical rigor. An ancient but deeply human presence. We can now add a physical form to the name, to the genetic echo. When we think of the gifts they gave to Tibetans, we can now picture a people whose own broad chests and unique physiology were already at home in the thin air of the mountains. The ghost now has a shape. It has features. We cannot yet look into its eyes, but for the first time we can almost see its face. And in doing so, we feel a new kind of connection, a new kind of intimacy with this lost family. Section 9: Footprints Beyond the Cave. For so long, our entire understanding of this lost world has been balanced on the head of a pin. It has rested on the evidence from a single extraordinary place, the Denisova cave. A child's finger bone, a few giant teeth. From this and the almost magical power of genetics, we have spun out a story of a vast and widespread people, given them a phantom face, and found their living echo within our own veins. But a seed of doubt might linger in a quiet mind. Was the cave an anomaly? A strange, isolated pocket of humanity? A genetic curiosity whose importance we have overstated? To truly know the Denisovans, to confirm their vast continental kingdom, we had to find them somewhere else. The ghost had to leave a footprint in another part of the world. The search now takes us far from the cool, green hills of Siberia, south and west, climbing higher and higher, until the air grows thin and the sky turns a deeper, more piercing shade of blue. Our destination is the Tibetan Plateau, the roof of the world. It is a land of immense, windswept plains, jagged mountains, and a profound, luminous silence. It is here, in this place of extreme altitude and breathtaking beauty, that the next part of the story was waiting. But it was not found by a team of geneticists or archaeologists. It was found by a Buddhist monk. In 1980, a monk seeking a quiet place for prayer entered a cave near his monastery in Xiahe, China. And there he found a fossil. It was half of a human jawbone, a mandible stained dark by time and minerals. It was incredibly robust, with two enormous fully formed molars still embedded in the bone. It was clearly ancient, clearly human, but not like any human the monk had ever seen. Recognizing its significance, he gave this fossilized prayer to the sixth Gungtang living Buddha, who then passed it on to scientists at Lanzhou University. And there for decades the jawbone sat. It was a beautiful, tantalizing enigma. It was studied and admired. It was clearly very old, but its identity was a complete mystery. It didn't look quite like the classic Homo erectus fossils also found in China. It didn't look like a Neanderthal. It certainly wasn't a modern human. It was another phantom, another fossil without a family. And critically, because of its great age and the environment in which it was found, no one could extract any DNA from it. The book of its genome was closed, its pages seemingly erased by time. The jawbone remained silent. This is where our story could have ended, with another beautiful but frustrating question mark. But science, like life, is always developing new senses, new ways of hearing the whispers of the past. If the DNA, the book of life, was gone, what about the things the book had built? What about the proteins? Proteins are the workhorses of the cell, the molecular machines built from the DNA blueprints. And some proteins, like the collagen that forms the matrix of our bones and teeth, are incredibly tough. They can sometimes survive long after the fragile DNA has vanished. This is the world of paleoproteomics, the study of ancient proteins. It's like trying to identify a car manufacturer just by analyzing the chemical composition of the steel in its frame. It is a subtle, demanding, and revolutionary science. A team of researchers decided to try this new technique on the Xiahe jawbone. They drilled a tiny sample from one of the huge molars and performed a painstaking analysis, breaking down the ancient collagen to read the sequence of its amino acids, the building blocks of the protein. They were reading a memory held not in the language of the genome, but in the structure of the skeleton itself. They translated this protein sequence back into the DNA code that must have produced it. And then they compared that code to the genomes of every known human group. They checked it against Homo sapiens. No match. They checked it against Neanderthals. No match. And then they checked it against the ghost from Siberia. It was a perfect match. The protein signature from the Tibetan jawbone belonged, unequivocally, to the Denisovan lineage. It was a moment of stunning, breathtaking vindication. A key, forged in a Tibetan cave, had just turned a lock discovered thousands of miles away in Siberia. The ghost was no longer confined to a single cave. It had a second home. The footprint was found. And the location of this footprint was the most poetic and powerful confirmation imaginable. Here, embedded in the very rock of the Tibetan plateau, was the physical proof of the Denisovan people, in the exact location where their greatest known genetic gift, the S1 gene for high-altitude survival, provides its miraculous benefit to modern Tibetans. We had found the echo in the genes first. We knew they had given this gift. Now we had found the bones of the givers. They were not just passing through. They were living there, thriving there, adapting to the thin air of the roof of the world, long before modern humans arrived. This jawbone, dated to at least 160,000 years ago, proved that the Denisovans were the first humans to conquer this incredibly challenging high-altitude environment. Their adaptation wasn't theoretical. It was their reality. With this discovery, the map of the Denisovan world exploded. From the subarctic forests of Siberia to the 11,000-foot high plains of Tibet, their known range was now immense. And it started to connect other dots. Other strange, archaic fossils found in China over the years, fossils that didn't quite fit into any category, are now being re-examined. Could they, too, be Denisovans? A skullcap from Xuchang, a partial skull from Harbin nicknamed Dragon Man. These and other finds show Denisovan-like features. A low, long brain case, massive brow ridges, large teeth. The story is still unfolding, but it seems increasingly likely that what we call Denisovan was not a single monolithic people, but a vast and diverse network of related populations that dominated Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. The ghost is becoming solid. The phantom is gaining substance. The whispers are becoming a conversation. with voices joining in from different parts of a forgotten world. We are no longer just listening to the echo in our own genes. We are beginning to find the physical footprints of these ancestors, left in the ancient earth of the continent they once ruled. Section 10. The Woven Human Tapestry. And so, our journey together tonight approaches its gentle end. We have traveled from the cool, dark earth of a Siberian cave, through the bright, sterile hum of a laboratory, and into the deepest, most intimate landscape of all, the living code that resides within your own cells. We have followed the footprints of a ghost, given it a name, sketched its face from the memory of its genes, and found its solid remains on the roof of the world. We have stood at the crossroads of ancient peoples and felt the echo of their meetings, a resonance that has shaped the very nature of who we are today. Now, all that is left is to stand back in the quiet of this moment and gaze upon the picture we have assembled to understand what it means. The story of the Denisovans is more than just the discovery of a new character in our prehistoric play. It is a story that takes the book of human origins, a book we thought we knew how to read, and gently but irrevocably rips out its spine. It asks us to let the pages fall to the floor, to see them scatter, and to realize that the story was never meant to be read from front to back in a straight, simple line. The story of humanity is not a line. It is not a march of progress, not a ladder with your own species standing proudly at the top. It is something far more wild, more beautiful, and more true. Imagine instead a great loom. On this loom, a vast and complex tapestry is being woven. For a very long time we believed this tapestry was made of a single golden thread, the thread of Homo sapiens. We saw other, shorter threads like the gray of the Neanderthals, running alongside ours for a time, but ultimately ending, leaving our golden thread to continue on alone, pure and unbroken. This was the story we told ourselves. A story of singularity, of replacement, of triumph. The Denisovans have shown us that this was never the truth. They are a third thread, perhaps a deep earthy color, woven into this tapestry, and as we look closer we see that the threads do not just run in parallel. They cross over. They twist together. They merge. The gray thread of the Neanderthals weaves into the golden thread of our ancestors. The deep earthy thread of the Denisovans does the same. And the Denisovan thread itself we now see is woven from an even older, more ancient fiber, the ghost of the superarchaics. The tapestry of humanity is not a single color. It is a vibrant, complex, and interwoven cloth. You are a living piece of that tapestry. The story of evolution is not something that happened to other people long ago. It is the story that created you. If your heritage carries the echo of Neanderthals, you carry the thread of the Ice Age survivors of the West. If your heritage holds the song of the Denisovans, you carry the thread of the mysterious masters of Asia, the mountain dwellers, the givers of powerful gifts. You are not a single, purebred lineage. You are a mosaic. You are a living hybrid of ancient strengths, a child of many ancestors. Your own body is a testament to the fact that our past was not one of walls but of bridges. This changes how we must think about ourselves, about our place in the world. It teaches us a lesson in humility. We are not the sole, triumphant inheritors of the earth. We are the survivors, yes, but we survived in part by welcoming the strengths of others into our own bloodline. We are the sum of many parts. The other great human experiments, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, did not fail. They did not simply vanish into the silence of extinction. In a very real and biological sense, they live on. They achieved immortality by becoming a part of the human river that continued to flow. They are the currents and eddies that still swirl within the main channel. Let your mind drift over this thought. The idea of us and them dissolves in the deep past. There was only a diverse, widespread family of humans, all of them clever, all of them resilient, all of them trying to survive in a difficult world. And when they met under the Pleistocene stars, they did not only see a rival. They sometimes saw a partner. They saw a fellow human. In those moments of connection, they wove the future. They wove you. The search is not over. The Denisovan story is still being written. New fossils will be found. New ancient genomes will be sequenced. New echoes will be detected in the DNA of living people. The tapestry will become richer, its patterns more intricate, with every passing year. But the fundamental truth will remain. Our history is one of connection. Our strength is one of diversity. Our past is not a foreign country. It is the very soil from which we have grown. The child in the Siberian cave, the monk in the Tibetan highlands, the scientist in the German lab, and you resting here now, we are all a part of this single unfolding story, this great and mysterious human tapestry. And so, our journey through the phantom lineage comes to a close for tonight. The whispers from the cave have settled, and the ghosts of our ancient family have been acknowledged. They are not strange or alien. They are a part of us. As you feel the gentle weight of sleep drawing near, let this sense of deep connection be a comfort. Feel the rhythm of your own breath, a rhythm shared by countless generations that came before you, a long unbroken thread stretching back into the mists of time. You are not alone in this world. You carry a world within you. Allow the stories to dissolve now, leaving only a feeling of peace, of belonging to something vast, ancient, and beautiful. Let your mind become quiet, and your body become still. Rest now and dream well. Good night.